So picking up from the last video, we've done a few things to this project. Because I've updated SolidDNA to use SolidWorks 2017 DLLs, I've done the same in the add-in. So these now reference the 2017 DLLs. They're in the GitHub repository as well. I've also gone ahead and just added all of them. So we've included things like motion study. That's because we're now going to do selections, so you can get any objects that are selected, and motion study is one of the things that you can have a selection of. So to include every possible selected item, we were just including every interop assembly for now. When you do re-add these references, they by default go to enable interop true, so change them back to false again. And then I cleaned up this read details. So before, I don't know why I didn't click him when I was doing the video, but I made it pretty complicated just for getting a custom property. I was using more of an editor if you wanted to mess with existing ones and tweak them. So instead of having the custom properties and then the big long if properties.first or default value, it's now a simple case of just model.get custom property and the name. So you can see how much tidier that is now for all the get custom properties. So the code's, you know, cleaner still. So that's it for the changes in the previous add-in. I didn't think it was worth making a video just for those changes. So we've gone ahead and now added the ability to get selected items and then to cast them to any possible type. So it's been a lot of work. So if you go into the SolidDNA, you'll see a model, for example, feature, and then features. We've now got a lot of features and a lot of feature data which we can get. It's basically every possible feature in SolidWorks. So we won't use all of those, but they're ready to be used. And then I've added dimension because that's what we want to do. So you can get a dimension as well. So I'll quickly show you how this works. In the read details, which is because it's covered when the active model changes. So basically whenever an active model changes, when we've got the part here, or the assembly in this case, because we've added the ability to work on assemblies as well, we just do model.selection changed plus equals and then tab, and it will add an event handler. So if we scroll back up, you'll see it's just added this. We'll say listen out for selection changes, and then if we go to this function, now this will fire whenever a model's open and something gets selected. So to do that, we can then do DNA.application.active model, because we know that's what we're working with. It has to be active for a selection to happen. Question mark just in case it's null for any reason, and then dot selected select. Oh, I spelled it wrong there. That's right. Let's just rename that. Selected objects, and same there. So now it's selected objects. It's going to give us selected objects, so we'll just say objects. Same syntax as the custom property editor before, where it's basically a function. So you open and close your parentheses here and here. So we got rid of this. You'd see it's a function. And then inside the function, we then pass in this lambda expression, which is basically another set of parentheses with the values we're going to be given, then a greater than, an equals and greater than sign, and two curly brackets. And then inside of here, now this function will call us and give us these objects, which is a list of all the selected objects. So from that, there might be none as well. It might be an empty list. It won't be null, but it might be none. We want to find the selected, if we've got a selected dimension in this case. So before we do a dimension, we'll just show some information about any currently supported object, which right now is a feature and a dimension. I'll add more support later. So we'll first go through every object. So we'll do objects.forEach, and it's selected. And then what's going to happen here, we're just going to go through, and effectively the last object that's selected, if they select more than one, then the latest object is going to take precedence, because this is just going to run for each one and the newest one will be last. And we're just going to set the text of one of our text boxes to some information about the selected item, so we can visibly see what we're selecting. So you can do selected, and you can see right now we can support if it's a dimension or if it's a feature, and we've got the object type. So really quickly we'll just do thread helpers.run on UI thread, and now before we run on the UI thread, because then that will go off this thread and then this selected objects will finish, and if you step in you'll see what will happen. This will get all the selected objects, it will add them to a list, it will then call the action on the list, and then we're going to spin off onto the UI thread, which means this is going to come back and then it's going to dispose of everything. So if we spin off onto the UI thread here and then try and access this object or this selected object in here, it's going to get disposed. So anything you want to do with the selected object, first get the values here. So we'll just say var a equals object type, and now in here we can reference this local property here. And you've got to make sure when you're referencing things as well, it's not a COM object, because it's just going to be disposed anyway, and then this var wouldn't work either. So you just got to bear in mind whenever you're jumping onto the UI thread, make sure you've got non-COM data stored in variables before you jump onto a UI thread. We're going to do, let's do the length text box in this case, and that text is just going to equal the object type to string for now. And let's just quickly run that just to see. We should see then the sheet metal length text box being filled with whatever object type is selected. So that'll just give us a quick visible check of what's going on with the selection, and also making sure it's working. So we've got to open a part. So we'll open the usual part, and then it's this here we're going to expect to fill. So let's select this boss, and you can see it's got a selection body feature. It's got external sketch points, got datum planes. These are nothing, so nothing's happening because, oh there we go, we've got one there. Cabinets, I think that one was. Annotation view. So this is a good way to, you know, see what's been selected. And then if we go to the sketch, go to this sketch, you can see a dimension, and that's what we're going to be interested in ultimately. So we can see the selection's working. So you could use this, like I say, to help you figure out what's going on. We'll leave that in because we'll use that. But what we want to do, we're only interested in a dimension. So we'll check if it's a dimension first. So we'll just say if it's not a dimension, then return, because we're not interested. And then if it is a dimension, which is here, then we'll do selected.as dimension. And then again, we'll get the dimension given to us, because it will get disposed of after this call. And then we're going to have to move this inside. So now we've got a dimension. So now we can do anything with the dimension. Right now I've just exposed the selection name because that's all we're interested in. We want to get the selection name, like as the example says, D1 at sketch 1. That's just an example of what it'll be. But the name you use to select that sketch, that's what we want to get. And we're going to set that to the length custom property when the user selects something. If you want to access the underlying object, in this case an iDisplay dimension, before SolidDNA has added all the abilities, you can just use unsafe object, but as it mentions as well in the description, use with caution, because you're accessing the underlying COM object, so you're then responsible for clearing up your COM references and everything else. But it gives you full access then to the whole of the SolidWorks object before SolidDNA has added all the extra abilities and made it easy. And you can do that on every single SolidWorks object, so you can even do that on dna.application.unsafeObject, and you can get the SolidWorks COM reference as well. So it's a useful feature to basically bridge the gap while SolidDNA is being made. So with this dimension, as we mentioned, we want to get the selection name, and it's as simple as that. So var selection name equals that, and we want to set the sheet metal text, and we want to also wrap it in quotes, because to set a custom property to a a specific name, you need to wrap it in quotes so it isn't just a string. So to wrap it in quotes, we want to do /quote, and then the value selection name. So that looks a bit funky to look at, but that's just your start to make it so that we can inject properties like this in the curly brackets. There's your opening and your closing double quotes, which don't get included in the value. That's to start this string. And then the /quote means to actually put quote inside the string itself. So that, if selection name was D1 at sketch1, we'd end up with D1 at sketch1 like that. That's the end property that we'd be setting, and you'll see that anyway when we select the dimension. So let's go and run this code now, and let's see it working. So whenever we select a dimension, the sheet metal text box should update. So we'll open the part, go to the sketch, and you can see there's nothing now. If we select this, and there we go, D1 at sketch1, and it's put the quotes around. So it's automatically set the property for us, and that's what we wanted. Now we might not want it to be like that. We might not want this to happen the instant we just click a dimension. We might want a button here that says copy over, get selected or something. And we might also want that button to only be enabled if there's a dimension selected. So let's quickly go and do that. So we've got the code here, which is when the model changes, the selection changes. So first thing what we want to do is change this code to cut this out, so we'll keep hold of that. And what we're going to do is add a button to the UI. So we want to do, here's the length, we've got a stack panel right now. We don't really want a stack panel there, we want a little button here. So we're going to make this an extra column definition width. We're going to add an extra width here, and then we want this to now be in the second one over, and then we want this to be 2 and 2, so this is just a small button, and then in that section there we want to add the button. So let's go ahead and do button content equals, and then we'll just do 2 little arrows to, you could add an image to this and make it nicer looking, but we're just going to make it really simple and just make a button with an arrow for now. And this wants to be in, what's wrong with that? That's not a valid attribute. I'm using special characters here. Okay, let's just use yes, it doesn't like that. I'm not sure what the breakout will be. Okay, let's ignore that for now. Let's just do or get. Let's just do get. Move it to the right column. You can also see it's quite high here because of we really want it to be the same height as that. So let's just split these off into some rows. We just want 2 rows, and the heights are just auto. We just want them to size to whatever's required. So it's now got 2 rows. This is going to be in the second row. The text box now is going to be outside the stack panel because we're no longer stacking, we're using the grid itself. Text box block is fine where it is. This is grid.row1. Same here. Got the margin we're going to have to move over. That's fine there, but it wants to be grid.column1. This wants to be column 1, row 1. Oh, sorry, 2, not 1. So let's move everything over. Just add the margin back to that. So there we've got like a length with a button that's to get the property. We probably want that to be, actually, I don't know why I didn't think of that, just use auto. So instead of sizing it to a set size, let's make it just as big as it needs to be. So there's the button we want. We'll call this button length, we'll just call it length button, we know what it is. And now we want this to be disabled by default, so is enabled as false, so they can't click it. And then in the code behind, when the selection changes, if we do get a dimension, so if we get to here, we then do thread.run UI thread this dot. In fact, let's do it a different way because we need to disable as well. So we don't need to do for each. We can actually just do if objects.any any is a dimension. So have dimension. So we check if any selected object has a dimension. Then we spin off to the UI thread. And we simply say this dot length button dot is enabled equals if we have a dimension. So they can't click it now until they have a dimension. Let's go ahead and add an event to that when the user clicks it. So click new event. Let's go to that event, and now this is where we paste the code back in for the selected objects. So we want to do the same as here as well. Copy and paste all of it. We want to get the, we know we've now got at least one dimension, so we'll do first, or in this case last dimension. So we'll get the newest selection. We'll do objects.last where it's a dimension, and we know it's got one because the button's enabled and won't be enabled otherwise. You could do an extra check here and do last or default, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then if we don't have a dimension, we'll return. So get the newest dimension, double check we have one, and now set the length button text. So now we change this to the text. Oh, have I not pasted back in the code? There we go. That goes there. Making a bit of a mess here. Get rid of that. So the last dimension, get the dimension name. So get the variable, then set the variable. So there we do the last dimension, cast it to a dimension because we know it now is one, and then with the actual dimension that we've got, we set the dimension selection name to the selection name. So once we've got the selection name, we then just simply set the length text to equal the quoted string of the dimension selection name. And that's it. So now we've changed it from being whenever it's selected to now instead whenever the selection changes, we enable and disable this button, so we know if we have a dimension, and then if they click the button with a dimension selected, we then get the dimension selection name and set it to the text box. So let's just run that and see what that does. So open a part, and then you can see this button isn't clickable right now. So select a boss, still not clickable. Let's go into here, select a dimension. And you can see it's now selectable. So now if we click that button, you can see it then sets it to the value. And that value, if you just double click this dimension, you'll see it's here. This is the, you know, the value it's pulling in. And that's what was required. So now we've got that. If we click apply, just exit this sketch. And then we go, you can now see the evaluated's also figured out that it's that sketch. And if we go to the properties, it's set the value for us as well. So if we just change that to another property, say we don't want the length to be that one, and we want the length to be here, you can see we've got that selected already, I think. Oh no, we haven't, we're still on the dimension. Select the dimension, click get, it's gone to 2, click apply. Aha, we are in an unknown, so there's a thing. We're in an, because we're editing the part right now, so we're like editing a editing the extrusion, it's unable to get the mass while it's on editing. So right now this is just throw and bubble up and crash. So what we want to do, we'll quickly add, now this is something you don't always want to do, but in this instance we do. We'll add an option to don't throw on error, and by default we'll set it to true because I think we don't really want to crash when we can't get the mass property. We'll add some code here. You don't have to add this to your project, this is SolidDNA, I'm just fixing it. So if true, don't throw on errors, just return empty mass. So here we just then want to double check if don't throw on errors, we do something else, we do this. So if we don't want to throw on errors, we just return that. And then it'll still throw if it's an unexpected exception. We need to do it here as well. So if something happens that we're not anticipating, we're explicitly throwing here. If something like this crashes for no reason, then it'll still crash. But we're looking at things like SolidWorks hasn't crashed, it's literally told us it's unknown, and we originally decided to, you know, crash on that exception. We're changing that behavior now to not do that, and we're going to do the same here. So if don't throw on exception, return that, I'll do that, and that'll fix that issue. So let's just run that again. Open a part, let's go into the part, and now let's click apply while we're inside, and it should, we'll notice the mass should go to nothing. There you go, you can't get the mass while we're inside because that's suppressed and it's unknown, but that's fine, it hasn't crashed. We'll change the dimension length to this one. Get, and there's 2, click apply, you can see it's changed to this one. Then if we exit the sketch, let's just check mass property still works. Yeah, and we've got the mass property. So there's the extra feature. Now you can get hold of any selection at all and do what you want with it, and we've used it here to get the dimension. So as well as dimensions, we showed you quickly that I've added the support for, as well as dimension, a feature, and features are absolutely huge, there's a lot in them. So once you get a feature, so let's just do objects, don't run this code, this is just to quickly show you some sample code. So for a, you do, if it's a feature, so you do if a is feature, then you could do a.as feature, and then that would be the feature you're given. And then with a feature, they can also be a lot of different things. So as you can see here, they can be attributes, bombs, headers, absolutely massive list of features. So you'd check which one you're expecting, or you'd filter by it just the same way. And let's say we're expecting a surface flattened data. You'd say if it's a surface flattened data, and then what's going to be added, I haven't quite added that yet, is going to be similar to the dimension. There'll be as surface flatten data, and then you'd get the surface flatten data object to do something with, so that you can see and you can query all selected objects, and then as well as features, it's going to add every possible selected object. So you'll be able to query every object and find out what it is. And if you don't want to do is it's a dimension, if it's a feature, you can do object type to get the type, and that'll return, you know, the type for you to display or do what you want with. So that's the start of handling selections in SolidDNA. And again, you can see how much easier it is to do this and to get a dimension. You just check it here, and then to get the dimension, you just check if it is a dimension, and if it is, then you just do as dimension, and that's it. You've got the dimension object, and it's all disposed for you by SolidDNA, so there's no messing with COM. Just makes it really easy. So keep an eye out on this. This will get expanded a lot in the near future. And that's it for this video.